Hello, Haunted Family. Welcome back. Story 1. Hauntings. I've lived in my current residence for over 30 years, and I can say with certainty that I've experienced some strange things. A year or two after we moved in, and for a while, I heard a strange sound at night, as if gravel was being poured down our rain gutter. I heard this a number of evenings when I was alone in my bedroom and my parents and sister were in other parts of the house. Once I even went outside to investigate and found nothing. After the sound faded away, another time we had an old cat who died. She was the only cat we had at the time. A month or two after her passing, my sister and I, and our poodle, were startled to hear the sound of an angry meow directly below the cot where my sister and the dog were laying. The dog's ears stood up at the sound. I dropped to my knees and looked under the cot. Nothing. Still, another time, my dad commented about something weird. He thought he caught the odor of lilac floating around the house. The smell gradually faded. A year later, I found a tiny perfume bottle that had belonged to my late grandmother, the fragrance of which was lilac. After my parents' death, my sister moved away, and I still continued experiencing strange things. But before I go on with new things that have happened, I want to say that things did not happen all the time. They didn't happen consistently. They would occur, and then there'd be a span of some years before anything new happened. Once I was sitting in the den when a large brass wall plate hanging on the wall, it had been there since my parents owned the house, started rattling by itself. In all the years we'd lived there, it had never moved. I jumped to my feet and shouted, "Cut that out!" And it did, immediately. I promptly took it off the wall and placed it in a closet where it has been ever since. A few years later, what I would swear was a disembodied, unintelligible, creaky-sounding voice made its presence known. This went on periodically for about a month. Once I even tried to banter with it, and it responded. Then came more weird stuff. By that time, I'd moved into my parents' old bedroom. While I was laying there, on the bed resting one afternoon, I happened to be looking at a full-length mirror attached to my closet door, when all of a sudden, I saw the brown, transparent shadow of my cat in the mirror, running at a fast trot across the room. That very next afternoon, the cat entered the room in exactly the same manner, with exactly the same body language. One evening, later that year, I was again in my bedroom, with my cat lying at the foot of my bed. As I gazed at the ceiling, I started to see a golden, glowing, transparent ball. I now believe this was a spirit orb. Suddenly appear out of nowhere, and then vanish a few seconds later, in a little spiral upwards. The latest incident also took place in my bedroom. It was just before 9 in the evening. By now, my cat had a companion cat. As the three of us were lying in bed, my older cat suddenly started looking around, and then up and down, his eyes intently following something that I could not see. He wasn't the slightest bit frightened. In fact, he even casually snapped at the darn thing. Then, our unseen visitor appeared to float over my second cat. This cat, too, calmly started looking around intently, then gazed straight up at the ceiling. "What the hell are you looking at?" I thought, somewhat nervously, as my gaze, of course, followed my cat's. After a few moments, our unseen guest disappeared, and the cats went back to their normal behavior. Story 2. My new home. At 15, my family and I moved to a small town in Tennessee. We bought a beautiful brick house that was only about 20 years old. From what I know, our previous neighbors didn't have any experiences with the paranormal. The only thing I remember my dad telling me was that the wife of the family was rather odd, and that she had broken into hives randomly one day. She tried everything to get rid of them, and nothing worked. I believe this went on for several months. After months of having these hives, the husband took the wife to the local church and asked the reverend to baptize her and say a cleansing prayer. The hives stopped after that. After we moved in, my mother began developing hives. She had had hives before, of course. But when we lived in the previous house, they was never as bad as they were when we moved into this house. The hives she experienced now were severe, sometimes covering most of her body. I don't really know if this has anything to do with paranormal, but it's an interesting coincidence. Myself, I didn't have too many experiences there. Whatever experiences I have started almost immediately after we moved in. One experience I do recall also involved my mother. We lived in a classic split level. When you enter into the foyer, you either go downstairs into the rec room, laundry room, bathroom area, or you go upstairs. Directly in front of you when you get to the top of the stairs is our kitchen. Then there's a living room, dining room, immediately to the left. The hallway to the right leads to the bedrooms. When I got home that day, I walked up the stairs into the living room. I came into the living room about 3 feet, with my back facing the stairs and the stair railing. My mother was on the couch facing me. We were talking. I noticed out of the corner of my eye a dark, shadowy figure walking down the stairs. This did not look like a normal person. It was pitch black, blacker than black. But the shape of it made me think a tall man. Over 6 feet tall, with a long, wide-brimmed hat. I turned around, and it was gone. I turned back to my mother, thinking it must have been an illusion. And she said, "Did you see that too?" She described to me what she saw, and it exactly fit what I saw. My sister told me that one day she was in the kitchen. She looked out the window that faced our backyard and our neighbor's backyard, and she saw a figure which looked like a man with a bright yellow raincoat and a yellow hat. She said as soon as she saw it, it disappeared. As I stated before, I've never experienced anything paranormal with another person, except for that one time with my mother. My mother believes in spirits and ghosts. My grandfather, my mother's father, died of cancer in the early 2000s. My mother was very close to her father and was there with him when he died. About 6 months after he died, we began having problems with the phone and phone jack. And while we would be on the phone would cut out. This happened quite often. One time, after the phone was cut out, while she was talking, my mother went to check the phone jack. The phone jack for the living room phone was actually in the kitchen, on the wall about 5 feet up from the door. When she went into the room, the cord was pulled out of the jack, and the cord was hanging on the jack from a small piece of plastic. There is no way the cord could be hanging like that if it had just fallen out. This happened several more times over the next few months. Over time, it became a joke. We would say, "Oh, Grandpa pulled the cord out again. About a year after it started, it stopped. I've not really had any other experiences. I do have a strong sense of being watched. This has occurred nearly the entire time we've lived here. When we first moved in, my bedroom was on the lower level, in the rec room. I would hear things, but I could never say it was abnormal, really. I would see dark blobs on the ceiling, and I just shrugged it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. A few times, I would be in the downstairs shower, and I would hear objects falling to the ground. I would check to see what it was, and there would be a stray shampoo bottle, shaving cream, or just some random item that had fallen off a shelf and onto the floor. A few months ago, I moved to one of the upstairs bedrooms, which used to be my sister's room. In the beginning, I really didn't notice anything strange. That sister said that she used to have bags fly around her room and other weird, unexplained happenings, like strange noises and whatnot. I've not seen anything in this room yet, but I heard some noises which were unsettling. But what's most unsettling is the constant feeling of being watched. I'm terrified of paranormal activity. I do not want to experience any of these things, whether they are peaceful or not. Story 3. A haunting? Or just my overactive imagination? We moved into this housing complex at the beginning of September, with very, very little history altogether. The complex itself is fairly new, and as far as I've been able to find out, has only had one death. And that house has no apparent mysterious incidents, at least that I know of. I've experienced a couple strange things where we live. And I'm not alone. My mom has experienced a few things as well. All that's happened seems directed towards the entire family. Things that have happened don't seem harmful, or even seemingly evil of intentions. If there's a spirit at all, it seems to only want to be recognized. I picked up the feeling that something was out of place. First, I believe, out of everyone in the family. It all started with the basement door. Someone would close it tightly and go upstairs to another part of the house. But whenever someone would return, the door would be open, only about an inch or so. At the top of the stairs, on the upper floor of the house, there was a short pony wall that was only about 4 foot high. Whenever I was standing there, I would get the odd feeling that I was standing in someone else's place. Sometimes to the point of being sick to my stomach, or overwhelmed with an intense throbbing in my muscles. Lots of headaches. When informing my mom that I felt someone or something was also in the house with us, she just shrugged it off. But it wasn't until she told me that the reason for the door opening was that people weren't closing it tight, that the door just popped open sometimes, that the door decided to completely stop opening by itself. After that, things weren't too easily to be put off. One night I went downstairs to do laundry. By our washer and dryer, we have 2 sinks. One, the closest to the washer, is always filthy. The one next to it is spotless. And out of habit, I took a glance into the sinks to make sure there was nothing in there. Of course there wasn't. Before I could finish putting laundry in, my dad came in the door. My mom and dad were not divorced yet, just separated. He stayed for no longer than 30 minutes before he left. My brother was not at home. When he left, I went back down to finish laundry. Taking another glance at the sink, I saw, which frankly terrified me, a tiny footprint pressed into the dirt of the dirty sink. No one besides me had been in the basement in the brief 30 minutes I'd been upstairs talking to my dad. I got quite scared, trying to think of all the logical things that it could be. I kept coming up with the question, why? It was most definitely a footprint. A lot smaller than my brother's. And even if it was a little kid that did it, how did it get into our house and down to our basement without us knowing it? And why the sink of all places? There's no windows in the basement, and there's no doors to the outside in the basement. We have 2 big 100-pound dogs running loose in the house. They would have known if a little kid had wandered into the house. And this was just 1 foot. 1 footprint. How did it get into the sink in the first place? Another thing my mom experienced. She was upstairs sleeping. I was asleep on a futon in the living room. The next morning, my mom came downstairs, complaining about not being able to sleep last night due to the fire alarm repeatedly going off. She said that it happened at least twice. The first time she stayed in bed, the second time she came downstairs to investigate, and noticed nothing. I did not hear a fire alarm, and I did not wake up when she came downstairs to investigate. The latest thing that's happened also involves my mother. I was down in the living room once again. She was upstairs, half asleep. She informed me the following day that that night had been so stressful due to hearing what she thought was me running up and down the stairs all night. She told me that she was about to call me out, seeing if I was coming to bed, when she heard me stop outside her door, which was slightly open, and act like I was trying to hear what was going on in the bedroom. I sleep in the living room because I cannot fall asleep in my mother's room. I don't sleep in my room because I don't feel comfortable there. Anytime I try to sleep in my mom's room, I hear scratching on the walls, like fingernail tapping and creaking. It's so bad and so realistic that I actually fear turning my head towards the sound, thinking I will see someone standing there. None of our pets seem to acknowledge or know that we have a spirit in the house, so that's kind of comforting. My mom and I get the gut feeling that our spirit, if there is one, is of a young girl, around my brother's age. Hopefully she can be at peace so we can be at peace. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to, and leave a comment down below. I love chatting with you. Thanks for listening. Bye. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio.